Ed wants to make a home in the middle of that deep V-neck and never ever leave it. He's sure he looks besotted as he watches Stede, who leans up to Ed's ear and murmurs into it, his breath whisper-soft on Ed's skin. "Can I kiss you?" Ed nods, heart in his throat. Stede clasps his hands behind his back and leans forward to meet Ed's mouth. Ed's expecting something fierce.
Hey everyone, Carly here. Today's epitizer is from Littlefingies. It's The Kissing Game by Veeagainst. Littlefingies says this is one of their favorite mid-season 2 stories. It's set during the time of the probation onesie after Ed told Stede he wanted to take it slow. But before we get into that story, quick show update. Our October edition of Gay Pirate News Hour, where we cover all the fandom news live on YouTube, will be Saturday, October 5th at 1 p.m. Pacific Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. GMT at the Our Flag Means Fanfiction YouTube channel. See our faces as we update you on the latest fandom clowning. Now this is The Kissing Game by Veeagainst, read by Littlefingies. Let's have a listen.
This fic is rated mature. Creator chose not to use archive warnings. For the podfic, no archive warnings apply. Can I kiss you? Ed's fingers slip on the smooth leather loop as he's trying to get this stupid cat bell fastened around his neck for day 2 of probation. He looks up through the curtain of his hair. Pinning half of it up into a bun is his next step, and sees Stede regarding him with a nervous expression, teeth pressed into his lower lip. They'd kissed last night, for the second time. Under the moonlight, a deliberate choice on both their parts. Ed shimmying in, shaking with nerves. Stede's hand sliding up into Ed's hair and pulling him close, until Ed's stupid heart panicked and remembered that Stede could just leave. Of course Stede could leave. Stede could leave any time. Ed could too. Ha fucking ha. Pull the other one. Ed's not leaving. He almost begged to come back. Is wearing a sackcloth and a cat bell for the privilege of being in Stede Bonnet's presence. It's okay, Stede says quickly. Sorry for asking. No, wait, Ed says. Wants to say. It comes out a bit garbled, but Stede doesn't ask him to clarify, just watches him with wide eyes. Wait, Ed adds, then stops. He wants Stede to kiss him, obviously, but last night it had escalated so fast. Just one kiss, Stede says quietly. Just a good morning kiss. I'll keep my hands down at my sides. Ed shuts his eyes and nods. Just one kiss. Just a good morning kiss. They're going slow, even if his heart feels like he's running a race. Stede's mouth presses against his, impossibly soft, almost chaste, but not quite, because there's nothing chaste about the way Ed feels about Stede. Stede exhales softly, and Ed feels the breath across his own face and thinks, breathing the same air, and almost chases Stede's mouth when he pulls away, but manages to hold himself in place. He opens his eyes. Stede's are still closed, but then they flutter open, and Ed could fall straight into the warmth of his gaze and never leave it again. Ed panics. Again. His mind starts spinning like a water wheel in a flood, thoughts spraying wildly off the sides. Stede must see it, because he says, maybe some guidelines about kissing to keep things slow? Ed latches onto that thought. A game, he suggests, inanely. It can be a game. What do you think? Oh, Stede says, sounding genuinely excited. What are the rules? I don't know. What do you think they should be? Stede gives him a serious look. Ed, I think you need to come up with the rules. Right. That makes sense. Since Ed's the one who requested limitations in the first place. He suggests, how about 3 kisses per day? Each? Stede clarifies. Ed hadn't considered that. That's technically 6 kisses, which feels a lot better than just 3 if he's being honest. He nods. 3 each. No hands involved during the kiss. And they can't be consecutive. Excellent, Stede says. What's the time period between them to make them non-consecutive? 10 minutes, Ed suggests. Stede nods. Makes perfect sense for taking it slow. Ed hesitates. And we'll have right of refusal. So if one asks and the other says no, then nothing happens. Oh, yes, Stede says. I thought that went without saying. Just, Ed says, careful, circling a great fear of his. Just want to make sure you can say no. I know I didn't ask the first time. Stede gives him a look like he's insane. Ed, I'm never going to refuse you. That makes Ed's stomach flip. He desperately wants to kiss Stede about it, but then he'll be down to just 2 kisses for the rest of the day. Unless... Has the game started yet? Stede frowns. I don't think so. You didn't say go. Great, Ed says, and darts forward, carefully keeping his hands engaged by clenching the sides of his onesie, and kisses Stede. Stede makes a surprised noise against his mouth, and for just a second, his hand grazes Ed's arm before he jerks it back. Shit, Ed says, pulling away. I was just talking about asking, and then I got carried away and didn't ask. Asking is very sweet, Stede says, slowly opening his eyes and licking his lips like a madman, because now all Ed can think about is Stede's lips glistening from Stede's tongue. But again, Ed, I promise you, I will never say no. Ed almost kisses him again, but realizes he's about to get into an infinite loop and holds himself in check. All right, he says. Reckon we should start the game? Any rules we should clear up? 3 kisses in a day, non-consecutive, with at least 10 minutes between each, no hands involved, and asking permission before each, Stede says, and Ed nods. And a new day starts at dawn? Ed nods again. That covers it. Excellent. Stede hesitates, and Ed raises his eyebrows. Are we starting? Yep. Can I kiss you? Ed laughs. He can't help it. Stede is so determined, and it makes Ed feel like his chest cavity is stuffed with joy. Yes, he says, and Stede steps forward, but Ed puts up a hand. First, though, you've got to help me put this bell on. Stede does, hands careful and warm at Ed's neck, fingers brushing over Ed's skin and leaving little sparks in their trail. Ed exhales, shakily, as Stede stands very close and peers over his shoulder to see the clasp. The bell settles against the hollow in Ed's collarbone, the metal cool, the weight oddly satisfying. Stede turns his head and meets Ed's eye. Ed nods and leans forward to meet Stede's lips with his own. The bell jingles between them, and Stede giggles against Ed's mouth, then pulls back. 10 minutes, he asks, sounding a little forlorn. Less than that now, Ed says, feeling a lot breathless. There's a minute where they both clearly, visibly have the same thought. We could just wait here for 9 minutes and 50 seconds and kiss again. And then Stede shakes his head and says, I'd better get up on deck. I'll come with you, Ed decides. I know those sails need stitching. They walk together out of the cabin, Stede talking about what he'd like to see accomplished for the day, Ed following close behind. And then Stede stops and starts to turn back, saying something. And Ed's brain fizzes and thinks, kiss, kiss, and he catches Stede at the waist and kisses him. Okay, he asks against Stede's lips. Better late than never. Stede sighs and presses forward just a touch. Stede's hand descends to Ed's hand to his waist and cups it. Then Stede leans away and says, Ed, that broke both the hands and the 10-minute rule. Oh, Ed says. He's never felt so silly in his life as he does around this man. And if he'd thought it was going to get better once they started kissing, then he'd have been very, very wrong. Just full-on brain dissolution at the knowledge that Stede Bonnet has lips and Edward Teach can kiss them. Should there be some penalty? Stede asks, his thumb stroking the back of Ed's hand. For breaking the rules? I mean, it is a game after all. We can't just have cheating. Yeah, Ed agrees, because he would agree with Stede if he said fish weren't real and the sea were on the ceiling. Yeah, definitely. Okay, what should it be? Stede asks, and Ed swears that he's swaying closer. Thumb, stroke, stroke. Ed starts, aware that they do need some kind of deterrent, because he's one more kiss or 10 more thumb strokes away from getting down on his knees right here. And he really wants to take this slow, but... Captain? Jim is somehow in the corridor and looking at Ed and Stede's joined hands with an expression of visceral annoyance. Yes, Jim, Stede asks, removing his hand from Ed's and turning. Ed fights down the urge to grab for him as Jim says something about another ship or the weather or some other thing a pirate captain has to deal with. Ed doesn't give a fuck. Not his problem anymore. We'll revisit this, Stede says to him, and follows Jim on deck. Ed finds a length of sailcloth in need of mending, and sits on the deck in the shade of the railing with a needle and thread. He really is trying to take Fang's advice, to sit quietly with his thoughts. It's a lot easier to do when his thoughts mainly consist of kissing Stede. Jim walks past him and raises their eyebrows. All love dies, huh, hombrecito? Like a wave on a black sand shore thousands of miles away, their words bring him crashing back to his past. Jim, he calls after them, and when they turn, he says, sincerely, I'm sorry. Jim frowns, shrugs, and says, just don't do it again, or I really will kill you this time. Well, Ed thinks, yeah, that makes sense. Jim's shoulders seem less tense as they walk away, so that's something. Ed returns to the sailcloth and has his tongue between his teeth in concentration when a Stede-shaped shadow falls over him. Ed, Stede says softly. He crouches down and inspects the sailcloth. Ed thinks, for the first time in a very long time, that he hopes his captain finds his work good. You're wonderful at stitching, Stede says, and raises his eyes to meet Ed's. Ed almost fucking does it. Almost surges forward and kisses Stede without asking or thinking, again. And Stede must see it, because he backpedals and falls onto his butt. Ed, he hisses, the rules. I know, Ed snaps, feeling sulky. Doesn't Stede want him to break the rules? Doesn't Stede want to get kissed? He stands, dusting his legs off, and holds out his hand to Stede, tugging him to his feet. Did you think of a penalty? Stede asks, his hand warm, fingers still clasped around Ed's. I think only one makes sense, Ed admits. You lose a kiss. Stede winces and nods. But you don't today, right? Since you didn't know there was a penalty? Right, Ed says quickly. No, that's just for going forward from now. Stede's standing close, and their hands are still joined. And Ed's starting to lose his mind because he wants to kiss Stede, but Stede is the one who wanted a penalty added to the game for broken rules. So maybe Stede doesn't want to kiss Ed that much, and... Ed, Stede whispers. Ed, it's been 10 minutes, right? Ed squints at the sun. It's been like an hour, mate. Stede looks around over both shoulders, then carries on whispering. Can I? Yes, yep. Stede squeezes Ed's hand tightly as he leans in, then lets go of it at the last second. Ed checks. Stede's lips are still as soft and enticing as they were the first few times. More, maybe, because Stede's doing this little adjustment thing now, so their noses are pressed together. The cat bell jingles merrily at Ed's neck as Stede lingers. Ed's head is spinning, and his heart is pounding, and there's heat in his groin when they separate. Okay, Stede says. Well? And he takes Ed's hand again, immediately interlacing their fingers. Yeah, Ed exhales. I'm going to, Stede says, and seems to realize how joined their hands are. There's an awkward moment where their fingers dance around each other before finally separating. And then Ed pats Stede on the shoulder and remembers weeks of doing that before, the only acceptable way to touch Stede back then. How every pat had been a substitute for a kiss Ed couldn't give yet. And how Stede had always leaned into the pats, and now Stede's leaning into the kisses, and... Okay, Stede says. Okay, I'm going. Ed watches him leave, then catches sight of Fang at the wheel, which is right above where he and Stede had just been kissing. Fang gives him a thumbs up. The day proceeds. Ed's got 2 kisses still to come, and Stede's got 1. Ed uses one of his when he goes to find Stede to see if he wants lunch. Roach is now serving soup for lunch every day, and the smell is so heavenly that Ed wants to share it with Stede. He winds up walking Stede backwards through a doorway into an unused room and kissing him with his hands behind his back so he can't grab onto him and push things too far. Stede's eyes do that thing where they flutter open like he's forgotten where he is, which makes Ed's stomach feel like the ship's just pitched over the steep crest of a wave. After lunch, Ed goes back to sailcloth repair, and it's surprisingly fulfilling until it becomes too dark to see the cloth anymore. He wanders back to the cabin, wondering if there's enough water for a bath, and is greeted by the sight of Stede lying on his back with his head underneath one of the armchairs, a stubby lit candle by his side. You all right? Actually, could you give me a hand? Stede's broad shoulders are taking up the entirety of the side of the chair he's lying under, so Ed lies down at a 90-degree angle to him and scoots under that side of the chair until his head is nearly touching Stede's. Stede is squinting up at a tear in the covering fabric, trying to stitch it while holding the fabric together with his hands. He's nearly done, but the fabric is stretched tight. Here, Ed says, I'll hold the edges. He manages to wedge his arms underneath the chair, the cat bell falling heavily against his neck with a clear ringing sound, and gets a hold on the fabric, pinching it together and pulling it taut. Stede quickly begins to stitch, using one of his hands to shield Ed's from the needle. Why not flip the chair over? Ed asks. I was trying, but the fabric kept pulling apart, Stede huffs. I've almost got it with your help, though. He puts his tongue between his teeth, clearly concentrating. And Ed starts to slowly lose his mind with the possibility of his final kiss for the day. The space under the chair is close and warm, and Stede's looking up at the fabric, so Ed can just look at him. Stede barely has the knot tied off before Ed's saying, "Want to kiss you, now." Oh, yes, please, Stede sighs, then turns his head and closes his eyes, clearly expecting Ed to kiss him under the chair. Ed hadn't even considered the prospect, but now it's all he wants. With their heads lying so close, their hair is touching. He manages to rotate around. Stede makes a questioning little noise as Ed uses his hands to shove himself further under, and then he gets their mouths together, Stede's lips fitting so perfectly against Ed's, despite the awkward angle, despite the crick in his neck, despite the dusty floor underneath them. Stede says. My ear, Ed admits, because it's getting smushed against the wood quite hard. Stede sneezes and almost gives Ed a head wound. Not bloody optimal. Ed reaches around the side of the chair and finds Stede's hand, twines their fingers together, and looks at Stede sideways. Stede squeezes Ed's hand and looks back at him, and Ed thinks, it's maybe going to be okay. The symbolism of mending the chair and mending what's between them feels like it ought to be too much. But Ed's realizing that he's a romantic, and he'll repair every broken chair in the Caribbean if it means Stede will stay with him. Stede saves his last kiss of the day for so long that Ed starts to worry that Stede miscounted, or thinks the first one this morning, from before the game, counted. Ed's been sleeping on the chaise lounge, Stede the bed, and now Ed is settling down on his stomach under the blanket, his onesie and cat collar discarded in favor of a long sleeping shirt, and despairing over getting his last kiss, when Stede emerges from the ensuite in his own sleeping shirt and asks, "Good night kiss?" Ed surges up onto his elbows and turns his head to look at Stede. The cabin is dark, save for the single candle Stede's carrying, and it illuminates his face beautifully. Stede is a man made to be bathed in soft light, Ed thinks hazily as he nods his acquiescence, afraid that if he speaks, it'll just come out as a squeak. Stede fucking kneels down on the rug besides the chaise and puts one hand on the cushion to support his weight as Ed's soul almost leaves his body. Stede puts a hand on Ed's cheek and turns his head to exactly the angle he wants to kiss him at, then removes his palm and kisses Ed neatly, warmly, like a key fitting snug into a lock. Then he presses his forehead to Ed's and whispers, "Good night, Ed Teach," his breath warm across Ed's lips, before pushing himself up to standing and walking to bed. Ed flops over onto his back and remembers, breathing. That's a thing people do. That's a thing he should do. He puts a hand up to touch his cheek where Stede touched it, and draws in a shivery little breath. He hears Stede rustling around in the sheets, and he thinks about getting up and climbing in beside him and touching his cock, but he's honestly not sure his legs can carry him that far. Slow. Slow. Ed is taking it slow. Because Stede could still leave. Or more likely now, Stede could kick Ed off the ship. Kissing's just a bit of fun. But Ed has a strong suspicion that anything beyond it is going to destroy him if Stede shows even the faintest hint that he isn't as all in as Ed is. So, kissing it is. And Ed can't complain. He's starting to think that kissing Stede is better than fucking anyone else. Ed wakes early to the sound of waves on the hull and seagulls in the sky. He thinks of changing for love, and love changing you, and then he remembers. The kissing game. He sits up so fast that the blanket slides onto the floor. He looks over and sees Stede asleep on his back, the curtains around the bed nook open, and he just can't wait. He can't fucking wait. So he stands and crosses the room to sit on the bed beside Stede. Stede murmurs, batting at Ed with one hand. Everything all right with the crew? Yeah, Ed says. Hey, Stede? Stede opens his eyes blearily. Yeah? Can I kiss you? Stede's face transforms into a sweet smile. He pushes his hair off his forehead and says, softly, a good morning kiss? Ed nods. Oh, God, Stede says, and sits up fast. You wait. He practically runs to the ensuite while Ed frowns. Sure, sometimes you wake up and really have to pee, so maybe that's it. Then Stede reappears, climbs around Ed to get back into the bed, pulls the blanket up to his neck, and says, Yes, kiss me, please. What was that about? Stede makes a face. I wanted to rinse my mouth out so it wasn't disgusting. Ed can't help himself. He laughs. You weren't disgusting, he promises. The soup yesterday was quite garlicky and Stede says, because Ed can't wait a second longer. You can keep talking, he suggests, against Stede's lips, and Stede giggles. That tickles, he says, not pulling away. That tickles, Ed says, accidentally pulling away and instantly regretting it. Stede is looking at him with sparkling eyes. Good morning, he says, sounding shy. Good morning, Ed says back. He forces himself to stand up, suddenly feeling awkward. All right, well, you go back to sleep if you want. They settle into a routine. Whoever wakes up first uses his first kiss for good morning. The other uses his last one for good night. They surprise each other throughout the day. Ed notes that Stede always has both hands clenched around something. A door frame, a chair's arm, each other. And it makes him want to melt, knowing how hard Stede is trying to follow the rules Ed created. Ed likes the rules. They keep things predictable. He knows what it feels like to get dangerously out of control. To feel like maybe he's lost his mind, and he doesn't want to go back to that place. Having these 6 kisses to look forward to every day, and having them occur in a way that he can control, fuck, it's doing wonders for him. Then, one day, Stede breaks the routine. He's up first, but he doesn't wake Ed for a good morning kiss. Ed wonders if Stede just wanted to let him sleep. He finds Stede standing in his closet, trying to clean his beautiful red silk shirt, and asks him for a good morning kiss. Stede beams at him and leans into it, and Ed's disquiet temporarily abates. They run into each other several times that day. Ed often seeks Stede out, but does his best to make it look accidental. Sometimes he thinks Stede is seeking him out too, and usually that's a good point for a hello kiss. But each time, Ed has to be the one to ask. Until he's run out of his daily quota of kisses before the sun has reached its zenith, and Stede hasn't asked to kiss him once. Ed starts to spiral about it. He must have done something wrong, something to make Stede not want to kiss him. He goes over all their interactions in his mind, but Stede had been happy and willing for each of Ed's kisses. But normally by this time of day, they'll each have asked for at least one, if not two. And when he sees Stede early in the afternoon, Stede just smiles at him and listens to him talk instead of initiating anything, even though Ed is leaning in and fluttering his eyelashes and licking his lips and, yes, fucking jingling his stupid little cat bell. Then, Stede asks Ed to help some of the crew with a long and annoying rigging task that is well below his skill set and keeps him occupied for hours, untangling rope and listening to Archie tell Alu a convoluted story about how she knows pythons can swim. It's well past dark when they're done, and Ed bypasses the galley and dinner in preference of going into the cabin and having a sulk. If Stede doesn't want to kiss him, fine. Just fine. He shoves open the door, ready to drag a blanket into the empty auxiliary wardrobe and hide in there until he feels better or Stede remembers he exists and comes to find him. Oh. The entire cabin is low lit by strategically placed candles, and there's a fire in the grate and a beautiful meal for two laid out on the table. Ed? Ed turns. Stede is behind him, holding up a bottle of champagne and smiling. Surprise! He lowers the bottle and gives Ed a serious look. Can I kiss you? Ed blinks several times to clear sudden tears out of his eyes. Oh, Ed, what's... Thought you forgot, Ed says, trying not to sound petulant and winding up sounding devastated. Thought you didn't want to kiss me anymore. Stede frowns. No, I just wanted to... He stops, looking suddenly embarrassed. What? Ed asks, wiping at his eyes. There's color high on Stede's cheeks now. To court you. Ed's stomach drops to his knees. Kiss me, he whispers. Yes, Stede says, face shining, as he leans in and kisses Ed slowly, longingly, in a way that makes Ed want to swoon into him. Then Stede steps back and says, Shall we eat? Ed could not possibly say what the meal is. It's something good, he knows that, but everything Roach cooks is. And meanwhile, Stede is sitting beside him, chattering away about his day while Ed drinks in the sight of him. His warm mouth, his muscular neck, his broad chest and long-fingered hands, and fixates on the fact that Stede still has 2 kisses. They finish eating. It's getting quite late now, as Stede pours the last of the bottle into their respective glasses. They clear the plates and leave them outside the cabin door, then retire to sit, Ed on the chaise and Stede in an armchair beside it. And Ed knows that there are 2 more kisses before this evening is done, and he feels like the key of a harpsichord, vibrating in anticipation of the next note, the next kiss, so highly strung that he might snap. Thank you for dinner, he tells Stede. It was a really nice surprise. Stede's face transforms with his smile. Ed loves how expressive Stede's face is. He wants Stede to kiss him about it, wants Stede to kiss him about anything at all. And Stede must read it in his face because he says, I'd like my second kiss now, if that's all right with you. Ed nearly breaks his neck nodding. Stede carefully sets down his glass on the table and scoots forward in his chair, keeping, Ed notes, his fingers wrapped carefully around the arms. Ed leans forward in anticipation and shuts his eyes, waiting for that first touch of Stede's lips. This kiss is slow and soft, like molasses, and something in Ed's chest clenches. Without thinking, he opens his mouth a little and licks Stede's lower lip. Stede makes a startled noise and pushes in closer. Ed clenches one hand into a fist by his thigh and holds his glass in the other, and carefully, gently, runs his tongue along the seam of Stede's lips. Stede's mouth opens and Ed licks into it. Stede's tongue presses against his own, tentative. Ed is dimly aware that he's digging his fingernails into his palm, hard enough to hurt. But Stede's making these little whimpering noises, and nothing could stop him from this. Nothing at all. Except a little matter of running out of oxygen. Ed separates their mouths, panting. "Oh my God, you're so kissable," Stede groans, the words like a bolt of lightning down Ed's stomach to his cock. Stede reaches up, and Ed feels him wrap his hand around the cat bell at Ed's throat. Was there noise? Ed asks, barely able to form a coherent thought. "Yes," Stede says. He gives it a little shake that tugs the leather strap against Ed's throat and makes his mouth go dry with desire, as Stede says, voice sounding ragged, "I don't want to hear it now," before he plunges back in to kiss Ed again, open-mouthed. Ed has one thought, which is to get into Stede's lap, possibly hauled there by Stede's hand on his cat collar. But in the execution of it, he forgets that he's holding a glass and drops it onto the hard wooden floor. It shatters so loudly that they jerk apart, Stede's hand flying off the collar. The jingling of the bell is suddenly loud in the silence. "Shit," Stede says, looking stricken. "I'm so sorry, Ed. I got a bit... Well, I guess I forfeit a kiss, don't I?" Ed's heart is galloping out of control. "It's okay," he manages to say. "I broke the rules," Stede says, and leans back in the chair, then springs out of it. "I'll get something to clean that up. Don't move. Your feet are bare. You'll get a sliver." Ed sits on the chaise and feels suddenly miserable. This is all his stupid fault for being so hesitant about this. It's just sex. He's had plenty of it. Why is he being so fucking weird about it with the hottest man he's ever met? Yeah, fuck, Ed knows the answer. But if anything, it makes him feel worse. He wants something from Stede that he's terrified to ask for. Because he did once, and Stede left him, and he went crazy from grief. And instead of believing himself that he's too much, that he's asking way, way too much, he still wants the same thing he did on that beach at the academy. Stede, by his side, for as long as they both shall live. Ed waits for Stede to return, which he does after a minute with several rags. Stede gets down on his hands and knees and carefully cleans up all the glass, over Ed's protests that he can do it himself. Really, it's his fault. "Let me do this for you," Stede says, finally, sharply, which makes Ed pull his feet up onto the chaise and pull the blanket over his legs. Stede looks up at him, and his face is so concerned that Ed wants to cry. "I'm going to sleep," he says, and pulls the blanket fully over his head. He hears Stede finish cleaning up the glass and walk softly around the room. Hears him blowing out the candles and go into the ensuite, and then re-emerge a few minutes later. Hears him getting into his bed. Ed wants to cry and thinks about how much he's cried in this cabin, and somehow can't. "Ed?" Stede whispers. Ed wants to stay hidden under the blanket, but Stede sounds so miserable that he can't. He pulls it off his face and says, "Yeah." "I really am very sorry," Stede says. "I didn't respect your boundaries." "My boundaries are kind of fucking stupid," Ed says. "I mean, I'm asking you to do something I'm doing a bad job at myself." "But they're important to you." "Because I'm..." Ed starts, then stops, because he's about to say something that'll just sound self-pitying. "It's a comfort," he says, finally, knowing what to expect. "Can I tell you something?" Stede asks. "About myself?" Ed stares up at the darkness of the ceiling. "Stede, I want you to tell me everything about yourself." Ed hears Stede rustling around in his bed. He turns on his side so he can see that direction, and in the moonlight sees that Stede has done the same and is facing him. Stede takes an audible breath and says, "You're the only person who's ever wanted to kiss me." He smiles and adds, "Unless you count your friend Anne, who I think had an ulterior motive." Ed blinks at him. That can't. What about Mary?" "Ah," Stede says, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. "Yes, Mary. We never loved each other, you know. Our parents put us together." Stede shrugs the shoulder not pressed into the mattress. "She had land, I had money, so that was that." There's something there, some hurt, decades old, that Ed hears in Stede's voice. Ed can't remember Stede ever admitting to something painful like that. He recognizes it for the trust offering it is, and he needs to be so much closer to Stede for this conversation. He pushes the blanket back and stands. Stede watches him with wide eyes while he drags the chaise over into the bed nook. He's pretty sure the whole boat just heard the noise its legs make on the wood floor, and climbs back into it, then reaches up and takes Stede's hand. Stede exhales and slips his fingers in between Ed's. "I want to kiss you," Ed says into the dark. "I know," Stede says, and smiles brilliantly. "And tomorrow you've got 3 kisses, and I've got 2. Ed tucks their joined hands against his chest. The chaise is lower than the bed, so Stede is a little above him. Ed sits up and presses a kiss to the corner of Stede's mouth. "That one's not against the rules," he whispers. "It's outside the rules. Because you deserve to be kissed." He hears Stede swallow. Then he whispers, "Good night, Ed." "Good night, Stede." The next morning, Stede's hand on his cheek wakes Ed, and Stede whispers, "Can I kiss you good morning?" "Yes," Ed says, a little groggy still, as Stede slides forward on the bed until he's leaning over Ed and presses a warm kiss to his lips. "I've only got 1 kiss left for the day," Stede murmurs when he pulls back. "I'd better make it count." The crew tell them that they have voted to end Ed's probationary period. In the auxiliary closet, he strips out of the onesie and puts on his leathers again. As much as he's conflicted about the implied authority, that onesie fabric kind of chafes the old ballsack, and then emerges to find Stede sitting on the chaise, waiting for him. He drops down to sit beside him. "What are you going to do with the kitty bell?" Ed shrugs. "I don't know. You know anyone who has a cat with a particularly fat neck?" Stede grins. "No," he says, "but it does feel like a shame to get rid of it." "Why's that?" Stede ducks his head. "Reminds me of kissing you." Ed laughs, startled. "Meow," he says, and headbutts Stede in the chest. Stede starts laughing too and falls backwards on the chaise with suspicious ease, which of course forces Ed to say, "I'd like to kiss you now," and Stede to flush, his chest heaving, and nod. Ed kisses him down into the cushions, and Stede gasps and grasps at the back of the chaise with one hand, the other flung over his head. "Getting bored of this yet?" Ed asks very lightly, because he can think of so many things Stede could say that would wound him to his core, and yet he's starting to believe that Stede won't say anything like that at all. This is an exercise in trust. "Ed, this is thrilling," Stede says, eyes wide and sparkling. Ed props himself on his elbows on either side of Stede's chest. "You're not tired of the game?" "I am having a wonderful time with it," Stede says. Then he grins devilishly. "Also, I'm winning." "What?" Ed gasps in mock horror. "I'm winning." Stede says, and hooks a leg around Ed's calf, then uses it to pull Ed closer. "I really think I'm winning. And don't you dare get rid of that cat bell." This is dangerous, Ed thinks, but suddenly it doesn't feel scary. The energy has shifted, and it's just a game that they're playing together. "Come on," Stede says, giving Ed a little push in the chest. "I've got to show you something." A few hours later, Ed's handing over 50,000 doubloons and 2 knives to some kids in the floating market at Nassau, because they remind him of himself at that age, and he's turning poison into positivity. Stede finds him, having left him just a few minutes ago, to go help Frenchie and Fang resolve a disagreement they were having about rum. Ed tells the kids about the inn he and Stede operate in his wildest fantasies as they leave. Then Stede leans in close and says, "Hey, I found a shop I think you'll like." Ed follows him down a narrow wooden path over sluggish water. He's never had strong feelings about this market, but walking through it with Stede, under colorful banners, is making him quite fond of it. He drifts back into the fantasy of the inn, that they're longtime lovers who have run it for years and need to restock. He imagines them bickering over what flowers to buy for the front desk. Just as the Stede in his mind is passionately arguing for yellow tulips, real Stede turns to give him a significant look and pulls aside a curtain over a doorway, holding it open and ushering Ed into the close, warm interior. Bolts of cloth line the walls. Tables full of ribbons and buttons and smaller scraps line the aisles. Hanging between them are racks and racks of assorted clothing. Stede doesn't hesitate, but leads Ed through a maze of cloth and cloth accessories to another curtain, which he also pulls aside, and also ushers Ed through, with a mischievous grin and a flourish of his hand. And Ed thinks, for just a second, about how there's no one else on this earth that he'd let push him into a dark room. How normally he'd have his knife in his hand, and would be shoving his companion through first to take whatever blow is coming. But it never even occurs to him with Stede. Then he sees what Stede has led him into, and he stops so abruptly that Stede runs into his back with a little oof. The front room had been a nice clothing shop. The back room is like walking into a Venetian bazaar solely for outfitting minor princes. Every surface, and there are many of them in the cramped space, is draped with some kind of fine fabric. It makes Ed's mouth water. It looks like the definition of the word sumptuous. Ed wants to touch everything. "Isn't it lovely?" Stede murmurs in his ear. "How did you find it?" "Oh, I was looking in the shop in front and started asking questions about the thread count on a lovely silk pillow and got sent back here." Ed loves Stede. He loves him so much, he feels like it's going to come out of his mouth sooner or later, and he's utterly terrified to say it, and is dangerously close to doing so anyway. He turns away and starts looking at the various items blindly, until his fingers run over something velvet and deep teal. He lifts it gently. There is silk, dyed in a gradient of purple to cream on its underside, and puzzles over its shape until he realizes it's a robe. "Oh, Ed, that's lovely," Stede says beside him. Ed runs his fingers over the velvet at the collar. It really, truly is. "It would look perfect with your coloring," Stede says. Ed glances at him. "I was thinking that about you," he says in a low voice. "It would suit both of us," Stede says with a smile. "But you should get it for yourself." Ed wants to suggest that they could share it, but that would suggest that there's a future between them longer than Stede might want, and Ed doesn't want to put that thought into Stede's head. Not on this beautiful day. And he wishes he wasn't full of thoughts like this, that turn positivity into poison, but "I'd love to hold it for you while you keep looking around," Stede says, all wide eyes and sweet smile, which makes Ed feel even worse, because Stede is being so kind to him, and he can't seem to match the feeling. He tries. "Don't you want to shop too?" "Oh," Stede says, and then he moves his mouth a few times like he's about to speak, but no words come out, before he says, "No." Ed instantly catastrophizes. Stede doesn't want to buy anything because Stede's going to leave in the morning and wants to pack light. Ed knows it's ridiculous even as it goes through his head, and fucking yet. "Oh," he says, "thought this would be your sort of place." "It is," Stede says. He holds out his arms for the robe. "Let me help you." "But why don't you want anything?" Ed asks, not relinquishing the velvet luxury in his arms. Stede takes a deep breath and says, "Well, Ed, I don't have any money." Ed doesn't get it. Stede forgot his coin purse? He can loan him. Stede must see it on Ed's face because he says, quietly, "I gave it all up when I left Mary." He gives Ed a little smile. For the second time. Ed is struggling to comprehend. Gave it... Yeah, Stede says. He squares his shoulders. I faked my death and left everything to my family. The first time I came to sea, I still had so many ties to my old life. It was like this... Stede gestures with his hands. This anchor of guilt in my mind. I needed to cut that rope to be free. Stede looks at Ed very seriously. So my old life is gone. Dead. As close to never was as it's possible to be for a gentleman. Ed's going to come apart in this fucking shop. Stede gave up his wealth because of what Ed said to him? What Ed said to him on the beach at the academy? Stede held those words and treasured them and acted on them. Ed holds out the robe to Stede, who takes it and folds it carefully while Ed watches him. Then Ed says, voice shaking, "Can I kiss you?" "Oh, yes, please," Stede says. Ed kisses Stede, just pours all of that love he's so scared to voice straight into Stede's face, his hands coming up to grab onto Stede's shoulders. Stede gasps and stumbles back into a table of cloth, but Ed steadies him, even though he feels like melting into him. He feels Stede's hands land on his biceps and squeeze, and then someone clears their throat very loudly, and Ed jerks back like he's been burned. A surly-looking old man is standing very close. Ed considers pulling out a knife, but the man, the shopkeeper, Ed realizes, just says, "Mind the finery," in a low growl and stalks over to the counter. "Guess I broke the hands rule," Ed mutters to Stede. "No," Stede says fiercely. "No, you did not. I started to fall, and you very kindly helped me to my feet." Stede touches Ed's arm, lightly, and says, in a low voice, "You did not forfeit your third kiss." Ed smiles at him. He really can't help himself. "Thought I was going to have to stab that guy," he whispers. "He was quite startling," Stede agrees. Ed notices, because he's very closely attuned to Stede's movements, that Stede reaches down and adjusts his waistband and... oh fucking oh. Ed's a bit of a connoisseur of catching glimpses of Stede's cock through whatever trousers he's wearing, and has gathered just how enticing Stede is down there. But for all their kissing, he's never seen this, which is the shadow of Stede's cock hanging heavy like it's full of blood. Thank fuck Ed's wearing tight leathers, or else he'd be sporting a matching, highly visible erection in the middle of the shop. Stede turns away, clearly still trying to subtly adjust himself. Ed bites the inside of his cheek hard and tries to think unsexy thoughts when his eyes alight on a pair of brown leather trousers. Not exactly a remedy for the sexiness situation. Stede turns back and raises his eyebrows. "Try these on," Ed suggests, reaching for them. Stede steps close again. Ed watches his eyes roaming over them and can see that Stede likes them and wants them, and if they fit, Ed is absolutely going to buy them. He picks them up and gently pushes them into Stede's chest. "Let me hold the robe," he says. "Oh," Stede says softly, running his fingers over the leather. "Well, I mean, I've got a little coin from the last raid, but I'd need a new shirt because this one won't match these." "Stede," Ed says, as firmly as he can, "I'm buying them for you." Stede looks up at him, a startled look on his face. Ed raises his eyebrows, trying to communicate how much he wants to do this. "Well," Stede says, "well, I could try them on, I suppose." His eyes look like they're searching Ed's face, and Ed wonders what Stede's seeking. Whatever it is, he seems to find it. "Pick me out a matching shirt, would you?" Stede asks. Ed takes the robe from him and nods. He comes upon a lovely dark teal shirt, similar in color to the robe, with a deep V-neck and thin ties across it that will do absolutely nothing to conceal Stede's broad chest. Ed briefly considers if it's unethical to choose clothing for Stede that specifically highlights how sexy he is, and decides that it's actually a good thing to expose Stede Bonnet's chest. It'll probably inspire world peace or some shit like that. He steps to the dressing room, a little curtained-off area in the back, and starts to open the curtain when the shopkeeper snaps, "Only one person in the dressing room." Ed holds up a hand in supplication, then passes the shirt over the top of the curtain. Stede says, "Oh, Ed, this is fab." Ed waits, heart in his throat, listening to the sounds of fabric rustling, and Stede's voice as he keeps up a running commentary on getting himself dressed. Then Stede opens the curtain and sticks his head out, looking at the shopkeeper. "Sir, can you give us just 1 minute in here together? I need help figuring out some laces." 1 minute, the shopkeeper growls, and then he reaches under the counter and brandishes a musket. But if it sounds like there's anything untoward happening... "Yes, of course," Stede says quickly. He reaches for Ed's arm and tugs him into the tiny space, closing the curtain firmly. Stede's a vision in the outfit Ed chose for him. Ed wants to make a home in the middle of that deep V-neck and never ever leave it. He's sure he looks besotted as he watches Stede, who leans up to Ed's ear and murmurs into it, his breath whisper-soft on Ed's skin. "Can I kiss you?" Ed nods, heart in his throat. Stede clasps his hands behind his back and leans forward to meet Ed's mouth. Ed's expecting something fierce, a continuation of the kiss he gave Stede a few minutes ago, but what he gets is soft and warm and infused with pure longing to be more, and acknowledgement that it can't be yet, and it takes Ed's breath away with how carefully conveyed all that emotion feels coming from Stede. "Thank you," Stede breathes into Ed's mouth. "Thank you, thank you." It quiets something in Ed to know that Stede feels some of what he does, to remember that Stede understands him. Back home, Stede changes into his new clothing in the cabin, before he and Ed head up on deck to attend Calypso's birthday party. He's doing a lot of hovering in Ed's space, an activity that Ed finds incredibly endearing. After a few minutes of this, Stede goes to the cupboard built in above the bed, and Ed, who has been watching all of this from the chaise floating in a haze of quiet contentment, cocks his head. "What have you got?" Stede turns. He's holding up the leather strap with the bell. "What if I ring the kitten bell?" "Oh," Ed flirts, because he can't deny that the sound and Stede saying the words "kitten bell" are really working for him. "You're trying to get me to kiss you." "I wouldn't say no," Stede replies, eyelids fluttering. "But you're all out for today," Ed says, as Stede sways a little closer. "Yes," Stede says, "and you've got one left." Ed says softly. "That I do, but I'm saving it." "Oh?" Stede asks, eyes opening wide. "For what?" Ed smiles, imagining how the night's going to go. Maybe this will be the last night of the game. For when we dance. The end.
That was The Kissing Game by veeagainst, read by littlefingies. Be sure to head over to both their AO3s listed in the show notes and give them a comment and a kudos. And if you want to send in something for the podcast, do that. There's really no rules, no regulations. Just get the author's permission first. Ideally, we want to make these around 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes. But hey, if you want to make it 5 minutes, we'll include it in a compilation of others. If you make it longer, 60 minutes, 2 hours, I really honestly don't care. I will put it up here. You'll send it to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com. For memes and other Our Flag related hilarity, follow us on Instagram at ourflagmeansfanfiction, all one word. Until next time, do creations, be cringe, commit crime. Bye!